The Republican National Convention gets underway tomorrow in Detroit, and the 36-member Georgia delegation arrived there today. News Team's Norm Wege met the delegation and is on the scene live at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. Norm, it looks like things are cranking up there.
Sure are, Debbie. They're calling it a coronation here, and when the Georgia delegation got off the plane at Detroit's Metro Airport this afternoon, there was an air of festivity. A local Boy Scout troop showed up to welcome Georgia's 36 delegates and 36 alternates and some of their family members to a city that's glad to have them up. Every one of the delegates are thrilled that their man Ronald Reagan will be nominated, so this will be one big celebration. On the issues, most of the delegates oppose the ERA and are happy with the GOP's hands-off stand. There are some who disagree with the Republican platform's proposal for an anti-abortion amendment. But if they have any reservations, they'll couch them in praise for the Republican Party because they want this convention to show unity for the GOP.
Well, I am not for abortion at all, and I think it's quite all right if that goes along with Ronald Reagan's views.
As you know, the ERA is in the breast of the state legislators. It does not abandon equal rights. It intensifies in equal rights, but it is responsible in that it puts it where it belongs.
And I'm against ERA too, but I don't think we ought to even mention it because it's a little bit, there's so much, confusion about it. It's just a federal grab for power.
So, Debbie, there may be some differences of opinions on platform planks, but these Republicans are looking forward for a great convention.
How do they feel about a possible vice presidential candidate?
Well, the Georgia delegation has a favorite, I'd say. Jack Kemp has done a lot of campaigning in Georgia. He's raised a lot of money for the GOP, and he's probably the favorite of the Georgia delegation. Around here, you hear George Bush mentioned as a moderate candidate. For the Georgia people, he's just too moderate.
Okay, thank you, Norm. Meanwhile, the man who will obviously be the center of attention.
What has come to be known as the coronation of Ronald Reagan, this year's Republican National Convention, is underway in Detroit. And News Scene's Washington correspondent Norm Wege is covering that convention via Sky Eye and was on the scene for opening ceremonies. Norm?
Jackie, it came off on schedule, and just as it was planned today, the 1980 Republican Convention was officially gavelled into session this morning by National Committee Chairman Bill Brock. Temporary rules were adopted and a temporary chairman named. Some familiar faces from the entertainment scene participated in the opening ceremonies. Pat Boone led the delegates in the Pledge of Allegiance. Glenn Campbell and Tanya Tucker sang the national anthem. Ronald Reagan arrived in Detroit this afternoon, but he's not expected to show up in the convention hall for a few days. So far, it's been a traditional opening day for a national convention. Lots of ceremony, little substance. However, the delegates continue to buzz on two issues: the Republican stand on the Equal Rights Amendment and who Ronald Reagan will choose as a running mate. North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms thinks he would be a good choice for some good reasons.
And see which were the states that Jimmy Carter carried in 1976 that put him over.
Right.
And if you look at the South, Jimmy Carter carried every southern state except Virginia. And I think that's where the victory for Ronald Reagan lies.
For the Georgia delegation, it was the day that they had awaited for all these long days and months. One delegate said, for a Georgian, it sure feels good to be in a room with so many Republicans. The Georgia delegation, by the way, is seated right in the center of this Joe Louis Arena, but they're blocked off from about half of the arena by a massive camera stand that's down there right beside them. Tonight's session, 8 o'clock. The highlight, an address by former President Gerald Ford, and then entertainment by an all-star cast.
Okay, Norm, I hope it's air-conditioned there, a little cooler up in Detroit than it is here.
It is indeed.
And another question, when will the major issues of the convention be discussed?
They'll come up tomorrow night. That's when Equal Rights Amendment and abortion both come as the Republicans debate their platform. Then on Wednesday, they take a look at a new vice presidential candidate.
Otherwise, just rub shoulders with the stars and have a good time. I hope he heard me.
Okay, thank you, Norm. President Carter is still vacationing.
The Republican convention is underway in Detroit this evening. If there's going to be any friction at the convention, it's going to be tonight when Republicans take up the platform. Norm Wege is on the scene at the convention right now. Norm?
Yes, and that platform is being considered right now, but we're going to talk about some Georgians. Normally there's some preparation involved before the Georgia delegation shows up on the floor for these sessions. There's an occasional caucus to attend to. Some members have committee meetings to attend. Others take part in any of a variety of party functions. But today was an exception for most Georgians here. It was a morning for a leisurely boat ride up the Detroit River. The delegates boarded a number of yachts at the Detroit Yacht Club and saw the city skyline in style. Some were a bit nervous to be seen on the cruise, afraid it might give a false impression that the Republican Party is an elite club for the rich. There was a chance to talk, though, to look ahead to tonight's presentation of the party platform. Most of the delegates from Georgia do not think that opposition to the ERA and anti-abortion planks will hold up approval of the full platform.
I'm not entirely satisfied with the abortion amendment, to tell you the truth. I think it's too simplistic and that the language is doesn't go far enough.
What would you have it say?
Well, I think that there need to be some more language put in an abortion amendment to satisfy me.
Are you expecting any wrangling tonight when that platform comes before the delegates?
No, I really don't.
You don't think that the Equal Rights Amendment or the Abortion Amendment are going to stir up much opposition on the floor?
No, I don't think there'll be very much opposition.
Well, I believe that most of the emotion has already been covered in the platform committee. It's a very realistic platform. It's simple enough that people can understand it. And I think the most important thing about the whole thing this year is that the platform will be something that people can identify with. In the past, people have said the parties always forget the platform when they go home. I believe this is one that we can stick with.
The platform being presented to these delegates tonight actually avoids taking any stand on ERA after 40 years of Republican support for the issue. Ronald Reagan tried to head off any opposition to this new position at tonight's session by meeting with a group of women today. After that meeting, Massachusetts Representative Margaret Heckler, a staunch supporter of ERA, said Reagan told them that he still opposes an equal rights amendment, but he promised to fight for the equality for women. He pledged that he would appoint women to high office, would even consider naming a woman to the Supreme Court. And he added he will not rule out any potential running mate if he or she happens to support ERA. Little sidebar. There are two very competitive newspapers in Detroit. The Detroit News, which is an evening paper, the Detroit Free Press, which is a morning paper. The Detroit Free Press says that it's been on guard for 149 years. Well, because of a Teamster strike, it went off duty last Sunday, and today, in an unusual event, the Detroit News printed a special section for its competitor, the Detroit Free Press. Detroiters are still getting both of their newspapers during this convention.
Norm, is there anything other than the platform tonight?
Yes, Chuck, the platform will take some time, of course. That's what's going on right now. And then there will be speeches and speeches and more speeches, winding up with an address by former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, and finally, the last thing on the program tonight, the keynote address by Michigan Congressman Guy Vanderchuk.
Okay, lots of rhetoric then. Thank you, Norm. Ronald Reagan is holding court in his Detroit. We're ready now on our report from the Republican Convention in Detroit, where News Scene's Norm Wagey is on the scene live right now. Norm?
Chuck, the conversation around here today has been buzzing all about President Ford's possibility as a running mate. Now that he apparently has turned it down, I guess the focus returns to Bush. As far as the Georgia delegation is concerned, they will be very happy with Reagan/anybody, but they would still prefer it to be Reagan-Kemp on that ticket. For the Georgia delegation, it was business as usual today, despite a severe thunderstorm that blew through Detroit early this morning. Heavy rain and winds, some gusts reported over 70 knots, knocked down trees and power lines and blew over billboards just west of Detroit. The storm hit hardest in the Dearborn area, where the Georgia delegation is staying. No one was hurt, but shingles were blown off the building, and power service to the motel was cut. As of tonight, it still has not been restored. Except for a few portable television lights, delegates used candles to light the lobby where they gathered. A group of influential Republicans was scheduled to meet with the Georgia delegation this morning to explain Reagan's stand on the issues.
Preparedness is crime. It's cruel. Our country today militarily is a second-rate nation in terms of conventional methods of warfare. Under Governor Reagan, we can expect to see that situation turned around, but it's going to take time.
A friend of mine the other day suggested that there was so much unemployment. What were we going to do about that situation? I said, we better make Jimmy Carter unemployed before all the rest of us are unemployed. And in that connection, we have had during April and May the two worst months in the increase in unemployment that this country has ever experienced since we have been keeping unemployment statistics, and that goes back into the 20s.
Tonight, Ronald Reagan will be nominated and selected by the Republican delegates. He will be their candidate for president. He was in the arena late this afternoon practicing the speech that he will give tomorrow night. Tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., a news conference is scheduled. Thereupon, the mystery will end as he names his running mate.
Okay, thank you very much, Norm. The Republican National Convention is already in session tonight. The main business, settling on Ronald Reagan's choice of George Bush as the vice presidential candidate. News Scene's Norm Wege is at the convention right now and has been watching the developments all day long. Norm?
That's right, Chuck. The convention is underway right now, about an hour earlier than was expected. It was moved up because some opposition to the George Bush nomination is expected. There is some speculation that the name of North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms may be mentioned, or that of Congressman from New York, Jack Kemp. The whole bizarre story of the Bush selection was developing behind the scenes as the states were casting their ballots for Reagan.
Mr. Chairman, the sovereign state of Georgia, which now hereby acknowledges and bewails its manifold sins and wickedness in sending Jimmy Carter to Washington, and which now faithfully promises to take him back next January. It is proud and honored to cast all of its 36 votes for that great and unselfish American leader, Ronald Reagan.
All through the day and even during the roll call of the states, the hottest speculation was on the governor's running mate. Would former President Gerald Ford really agree to take second place on the ticket? Once the nomination was assured, Mr. Reagan decided to come to Joe Louis Arena to put an end to the rumor mill. And when he did, he shocked many of the delegates by naming George Bush. Today, both men made their first appearance as a team. Some of Georgia's delegates saw this morning's news conference. Some chose not to watch. Some members of the delegation chose to return to Atlanta.
Obviously, Gerald Ford would have been better, but I say under the circumstances, I think it would be hard to improve upon Mr. Bush, given the number of people that were available.
My first choice, had I been making the choice, would have been the senator from North Carolina, Jesse Helms, but I'll go along. I think the candidate should make his own choice.
I was very surprised and disappointed, but at this point, I really don't know what to think about it.
Would you have preferred Kemp?
Yes.
Any last-minute challenge to the nomination of George Bush is not expected to change the course of this evening. The question remains, will the nomination of George Bush hurt Reagan, or will the Republican Party move out of Detroit with the unity that it has shown here throughout this week and be able to send Jimmy Carter back to Georgia in November?
So tonight's activities amount to a coronation for Ronald Reagan, right?
Well, Chuck, that word coronation has been used a lot, but it's interesting to note that there have been 31 Republican conventions in history. 20 times the nominee has been selected on the first ballot, so it's more the rule than the exception. And in fact, you have to go back to 1948 before there was a ballot that went more than one time. So coronation isn't exactly the right word.
Okay, have a good time tonight, Norm. Thank you.
Now, Atlanta has its own national public opinion research firm, the Darden Research Corporation. Claiborne Darden is its president, and News Scene's Forrest Sawyer is joining us to get Darden's view of the Reagan-Bush ticket. Forrest?
Claiborne, as you hear, there are some mixed reactions to the announcement of George Bush as the running mate for Ronald Reagan. Based on your own soundings, how do you think a Reagan-Bush ticket is going to play as compared with what might have been a Reagan-Ford ticket?
Right. When evaluating this, Sawyer, you have to realize anyone you pick as your vice president candidate will have strengths and weaknesses. Now, technically, Reagan did certainly the